Hi, I'm Hannah Judson, and welcome to the show. Today, I'm talking to musician and educator Kirsten Monke. She is a member of the renowned DaPonte String Quartet, and she's an expert violist and has many other accomplishments as well, which we'll be talking about. She's got a lot of interests and activities, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more. She's joining us from Mid-Coast, Maine. Welcome to the show, Kirsten.
Thanks, Hannah. It's great to be here.
So thank you
for doing this. I just want to say it's great that you are doing this series.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's been so much fun. Like it's been one of those things that has come out of the pandemic era, and it was sort of one thing led to another, and I just kept going. But I found that I needed the conversations, and it was really sort of motivated by just the need to talk to people and just to sort of keep going and make connections. But thank you. So what have you been doing during the pandemic?
Well, I have been practicing probably a lot more than I normally do.
Really?
Because I have a lot more time. And walking my dog. And in a strange way, not except for not playing concerts, not too much changed for me over the year. I don't teach in person. I teach online, which is different.
Yeah.
But it's been surprisingly successful. And I've been rehearsing with my quartets since the summer was really hard because then we weren't allowed to be together. But then came, I think it was a rule you could be under 10 people in the room if you were masked and the room was aerated. So we started having rehearsals. We found it was hard to find a space that would have us.
Oh, yeah.
But we finally did. And we had rehearsals, on our regular Monday through Thursday morning schedule, and all our administrative meetings took place online.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, not much has changed, but it's given me a lot more space to do things that I normally don't have the time to do because I'm driving from this place to that place, or, it's just busier usually.
Yeah, exactly. All the driving that didn't happen in the past year is pretty monumental. So do you think that you will keep some of these habits as we go back into the world?
Definitely. Well, as far as teaching goes, it's nice for now with my students, I can offer them an option to continue online or to meet once a month in person. And I live in a very rural place, so I'm kind of far, to get to me is a commitment of time. And so that will probably still be incorporated. I wouldn't want to just teach online. It's very important to be in the same room with your student, but it was functional. And and the other interesting thing was that I think it really forced my students to teach themselves more than they normally do, because it's very easy when the teacher's in the room and just sort of telling you what to do and you just do it.
Yeah.
But when you are by yourself and something doesn't sound right, you have to figure it out. And you can't just sort of play along with the teacher or
So would you take a student who lives in California, for example, or would you really only want to be able to see your students sometimes?
Well, it's funny because one of my Bowdoin students is graduating and she's moving to France.
Okay.
And she said, well, this doesn't have to be our last lesson, this we can keep doing this. And that I hadn't even thought about that. So I think it's important really to have a relationship with the student, but you know, we also, we even coached some chamber music online as the quartet. We usually have a weekend workshop for high school students every fall, and we couldn't do that. So we set up a way that we could coach the quartets were together, in their various locations, but we just zoomed in and coached one at a time.
Wow.
And then they gave a little performance on YouTube or, on Zoom.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
and it was amazingly effective, and it made such a difference to the kids to be able to play together. That was huge.
Huge. To keep going, to have the tools to keep going in some direction.
So I don't think we'd want to continue that because it was very challenging. But the things that we didn't, it was the things that we lost. I actually made a little list. We had just started a quartet institute for advanced, conservatory level students, and we'd had 1 year, and it was like it was.
And when you say we, it's the DaPonte.
Yeah. The DaPonte Quartet. Yeah. And it's the main thing I do. I mean, it's the bulk of my time. And we had just launched a quartet institute on a beautiful lake in the middle of Maine, and we had 16 kids, a group from Italy, a group from Maryland, Florida, upstate New York, and it was fantastic. It was thrilling. It was sort of our lifelong dream. It was our idea of paradise for us, of passing down this tradition to younger generation.
Wow.
And it was very successful. So of course we were looking forward to the second year, and then COVID happened, and it didn't happen. So that's going to start again next year. Fortunately, we got funding secured, and so that's very exciting. And then another thing that I had put so much energy into before the pandemic was creating a program for the Maine's bicentennial, because Maine became a state now 201 years ago. I had created a sort of historical program. It was based on different communities that arrived to the coast of Maine, and it actually started with the Wabanaki Indians, because there's in Paris was in 1608 a Wabanaki song was published by a French explorer.
Oh wow!
And so we started.
How did you find that?
Well, I have a friend who's an anthropologist, and he is also a huge history buff. So he suggested to me this idea of thinking about the different courts that sent communities here throughout history. And he knew, of course, about this Wabanaki song, and and it just sort of took off from there. And I think I spent a year and a half of like researching this late night, trying to choose music that was suited, that we could play on 4-string instruments, because it all had to be transcribed from different ensembles. And it is a really cool program, and we got to play it once, and then the pandemic shut everything down. So I'm sure we'll do it this summer, but I hope it doesn't lose its spell.
I think it won't, because because it's not just about 100 years. It's about the history of Maine. So there's a story there that is compelling.
Sure. Oh, it's really interesting. I learned all kinds of things about Maine history that I didn't know, having grown up here. So
So earlier on in this conversation, you said you take your dog for a walk, and you've mentioned coast of Maine, and you've mentioned it's rural. So we have a few guests who are live with us, and I know that some are not in the States at all. Hi, Andre, who's here from the Netherlands. So can you do a brief description of what Maine is like? How do you describe where you are? Where are you?
Well, I live on a peninsula, and I'm surrounded by trees. I'm looking out the window into beautiful pines. And I'm just a very short distance from the New Meadows River, which is a fresh water, saltwater river. And Maine is just especially this time of year, it's just stunningly beautiful, brilliant blue skies, puffy white clouds. The light is magnificent. We just went up to the Shostakovich Peninsula last weekend where I saw three other vehicles. I think maybe I saw two people. Wow. And it's just pristine. And there's a reason why so many painters painted here. Marston Hartley and Marin and just wonderful. It's just a very inspiring landscape. And also it's just very peaceful, and you hear the peepers. It's like a Mahler symphony outside right now, or maybe more like what is it, The Enchanted Child by Ravel. I don't know if you know The Bewitched Child, where the orchestra is in the pit, is playing the sounds of frogs and birds, and even the choir is down in the pit and they're sort of chirruping. That's what it sounds like here. So I love Maine, and I lived in California for a long time, and California was wonderful, but I'm from here like you are. And it just sort of holds a spell on me. So,
it does. Yeah. I understand that completely. So does the Maine coast influence your choices of music or the projects that you choose? Or do you happen to live there and you love music?
Wow. Yes and no. I mean, there's a certain body of quartet literature that is undeniable. And on the other hand, we recently commissioned a piece that was written based on the inspiration of a poem by Amy Clampett, the poet Amy Clampett. It's called What the Light Was Like.
Oh, wow.
And she lived up on the Shostakovich Peninsula and in these iconic lobstering village, Korea, with a C, Corea. And it really is, I just saw it last weekend, and it's not like any other place. It's just so remote and just a separate world.
Yeah. So when you say you commissioned a work, what does that entail?
Well, it was actually presented to us by somebody who came to hear us play. This is an interesting story in, sometimes, mostly when we play a concert, this is a side story. When we play a concert, we play in fairly small rooms, churches, small halls, small auditoriums. And, I would say our average concert size is like 80 to 100. That's a good house for us. And then once we played up in Waterville at the Opera House, and that place is huge. It probably seats 800 people. And there were 12 people in the audience.
Wow.
But interestingly, out of that, it was really a lesson not to be dismayed when you just see that small handful of people, because it happens to even the greatest quartets. I think the Guarneri Quartet once played for four people in the audience. It just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
but one of those people had never heard us before, and he was just really curious about our music, and he's a big fan of new music. And he had this lifelong dream to commission a work. He'd been carrying around this poem in his wallet
Oh, wow.
30 years with a dream of retiring to Maine. And he just had this idea that it needed a piece of music to celebrate it. And the original concept was to write something for soprano and quartet, but then when the composer Richard Danielpour started to work with the text, it was just too verbose. So he decided just to go with the emotional aspect of the poem and just make it a string quartet. And so actually we're going to record that. If all goes well with COVID, we're going to record that work in December out in Los Angeles. So
wow, that's great. That's great. That's something to look forward to also.
Yeah. So we'll also do his piano quintet on that program.
Oh, wow. How interesting. So people come to you with ideas for work, or people come to you with new music and say, it's really sort of launching it into the world. It's part of the conversation. When the quartet is thinking about music for the new season or music for the upcoming, maybe you do it by the year. How do you all get together and choose the music you're going to do? How do you know?
How do we know? Oh, it's we all have our wish lists of pieces, but then we also think about like what's going on, what's happening in the world, and how does the music reflect that. It might be an anniversary, like the Maine bicentennial.
Yeah.
We try to think of thematic programs, but usually those themes, they come from the pieces instead of, okay, let's think of a theme and then find pieces that fit to them.
Yeah.
So, and then it's also, we can't, what do we play? Probably 9 to 12 works every season.
Okay.
And maybe a little bit more. And then we have to balance them so that it's manageable for us, because we couldn't learn 12 brand new pieces every year. Right. It would kill us. We're getting too old. Maybe if we were 18, but so it's sort of a balancing act of how much we can chew and mixing old in with new. We're always revisiting pieces that we played in the past. At this point, I think I've played pretty much, with exception of a few Haydn quartets, I've played pretty much all the master works of the chamber music literature.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, with some big exceptions like Schoenberg and but then of course new pieces. And one of the things that we're doing, sometimes grants influence program choice, because maybe to put together a something that would attract a grant. I think the bicentennial program fit into that category. I mean, it just made a lot of sense as a, it just fit.
Yeah. Do you balance between new music and the standards? Or is it like 50-50 or?
No, it's not 50-50. It's like 33 and 66.
Okay. Yeah.
We really try. I mean, we have a span of repertoire that's 500 years.
Yeah.
Sometimes even more if you. We played some Spanish songs that were from 1420 something this year. So I think we really want to keep that huge arch and not be slanted towards one direction.
Yeah.
But we definitely are always trying to incorporate new works. in fact, in September, there's a young Venezuelan composer named Ronaldo Moya. He's a phenomenal composer, and he's in residence in Minnesota right now, but he just won an award from the Ellis Beauregard Foundation, which is a new foundation here in Maine that's doing a lot to support the arts. Wow. And they have let's see, the Bangor Symphony got involved and commissioned. They awarded a composer a commission, so it was a competition basically to get the commission. And our part in this is to actually introduce the composer to the community. So we're playing some of his quartets, and boy, is it great music, and boy, is it hard.
Wow. So I've got a couple questions about that, but first I wanted to say, for those of you who are joining us live, thanks for joining us. It's great to see you there. Andre has requested that you say hello in the chat and state where you're from. It's always interesting to see where people are from. Cynthia is asking a question. Who will read the Clampett poem in the recording?
I've been thinking about that, and we have to figure that out. I don't know the answer to that yet.
Okay, interesting. So you were talking about working with a composer, with a living composer who's created new works. You're interpreting those works and presenting them to the community. And so part of your role really is not as entertainers, but as educators and translators in a way. And so how much do you talk to the audience or write in a program for it? How important is what you tell them about what they're about to hear?
I think we all feel it's extremely important, and it's a big part of what we do. Our cellist especially is a big musicologist and music historian. And so he writes all the program notes, which are extensive. And he has all kinds of interesting theories. I better not go down that rabbit hole because but he's really good at tying in historical events with where a composer is. And when we teach too, that's a really important part of what we do. It's so when you're learning a piece of music, you got to read a biography of the composer, or you got to know who they were interacting with and what was happening in their
context
in the world at the time. Yeah. What are they writing about? And when you do that, then suddenly the music doesn't seem so styrofoam.
Untouchable.
Yeah, it loses its
distance.
Yeah.
So you were talking about learning about what was happening in the world at the time, about the composer's individual life. Does that influence the themes that you put together, like things going on in the world in the news? Do you link those?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example for today. I'm sorry, I'm just drawing a blank on something relevant today that we've recently done. But certainly our programs have been around these themes. One good example of the kind of thing that we've done in the past is a Felix and Fanny Mendelssohn program, and in which we had a singer and an actress read the letters that were written by the family members, and then played the pieces of the siblings' music side by side, and it's very powerful because you realize what a difficult situation she was in, not allowed to publish her music under her own name. Her brother published her songs under his name. The father said, your role is as a housewife, and you can go ahead and write music, but it's not, it would, it's not honorable to be a lady and publishing music.
Yeah, that's probably a theme that's not that old. Still, I mean, that still goes.
Well, it's changed a lot.
Yeah.
It has changed a lot.
Yeah.
I would say that rather than, for instance, one of the things is like with Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, I think rather than saying, oh, we're going to play a program of Black composers, or we're going to play, all women composers, it's more important to us to just put those pieces into the mix, as part of the mix, and not to try to isolate them.
Yeah.
So definitely we do that.
Cynthia has a comment. She says, you played Shostakovich, very relevant to today.
Yes, Shostakovich is very relevant.
Can you explain why?
Well, wow. Well, Shostakovich, that piece we just recently recorded a videotape recording of the 8th quartet of Shostakovich, which is basically a quartet that's all in code, written by somebody who was just terribly oppressed and talking to his people who understood his language and understood what he was trying to say. He lived under Stalin, the dictator, and he lived in fear of being carted away by the KGB in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
He lived with a suitcase under his bed, and so this, in the piece, you actually hear the KGB knocking on the door. It's terrifying. You hear, it's a very dark piece, and you're witness. I mean, and it starts with his initials and ends with his initials are woven throughout.
Yeah.
In the music, and as if to say, I bear witness to this. To the current politics that are happening, and yeah, I mean, we've just gotten out of some pretty oppressive times, I would say, or a little scary times. I wouldn't say it was comparable to the Soviet Union, but well,
there were definitely threads you could follow. There were,
yes, and where you feel like it's not okay to say certain things.
So when the quartet is taking on a new piece, how do you decide how it's going to go? Does everybody take their part home and work on it, and then you get together and then you figure it out? Or do you discuss this in advance? Like, this is a really tender work, and what's really important to amplify is this, that, and this? Or how does that work in a group?
It's very funny that you asked this question, because we were actually talking about this yesterday. It depends on what we're learning, but we have a very particular way, and I would say an unusual way of learning music, where we play incredibly slowly, because everything that we do is based on building a harmonic structure, which is a fancy way to say to play absolutely in tune.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to play absolutely in tune, but where we just go note by note, lining up the chords.
Wow.
This is a very difficult thing for me, because I'm a middle voice, and that means my notes have to move around a lot. And I'm a person who hears things more in a linear way instead of in a vertical way. So, so this is a very slow process, and it makes a lot of sense for Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, because when things are really in tune, it has a whole different ring and a whole different kind of clarity. And it's not about the mood or what we personally like about the piece. It's really about the structure and
Wow.
how the music was composed
Yeah.
and putting it together that way. And then the music making sort of arises out of that, hopefully.
Yeah.
And we're very, very detailed about looking into the score, and to the point where we get facsimiles of manuscripts and trying to,
Wow.
like there's manuscripts of Mozart where you can see that Mozart didn't put that forte in, somebody else's hand put the forte in the music. So what does it mean? And very, very, very nitpicky stuff like that. We really go note by note. So now we have some very challenging music to learn in a fairly short amount of time. And so how do we go about putting that together? And a lot of music today is much more rhythmically driven, where the very complicated rhythms. And maybe that's more important, or it's hard to say if one thing is more important, but so how do you get to that place where you're building in all those things at once? It's tricky, and we each individually have different learning processes of how we absorb things. So we have to figure out what makes all of us comfortable.
Yeah.
And make sure that we don't just get too focused on one way of learning a piece or approaching a piece. Of course, we should all be preparing our parts at home. I mean, we try to do that. Sometimes we get in a little crunch of where we're really learning it together. Sometimes that makes sense to do just because of the intonation involved. It puts your fingers in a slightly different place. And also when you learn something as four, your sense of rhythm changes, because everybody
feels it.
Everybody feels it slightly differently. So if you really have invested hours and hours of time playing it the way you want to do it and the way you feel it, then to play it with somebody else who feels it differently can be very jarring.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
So it's not an excuse to say, don't practice your part. But, but it's something that I notice all the time, oh, I never would have played it that way. It's
interesting. Different. So are you all in your quartet? Are you all equally interested in history and the history of music, or do you have to do that to be part of this group?
No, I think two of us are I think we're all interested in history. I think probably I would say Miles and I are like, that's not, I mean, everybody's interested in it. It's just I can't say.
Yeah. Well, I think it is fascinating that you do deep dive into the works. You don't just take them and then discuss and do your version of it. You are really taking on the work.
Yeah.
And so when a work has existed for a couple hundred years and many people have played it and you've heard it many times, I suppose that's one process or one sort of brain process. When you're working on new music, do you ever just call the composer up and say,
yes,
what were you thinking? Or what is this? Or
oh yeah. That's what's great about working on Daniel Poor now. We have a list of questions like, well, I don't understand what you were trying to say here. And now with this Moya piece, it's we're gonna have a lot of questions. Like he writes something, I have to look up how he describes it. He writes this thing about rhythm, irrational time signatures. Like, wow, what does that mean? Suddenly, instead of
so that's his note.
Yeah. He puts in irrational time signatures, and it makes sense when you read his explanation of it. And it's an incredible way to write. He's just a master of manipulating time.
Wow.
And so you get these sort of rhythmic stutters because he adds parts of beats in,
Yeah.
and he does it through this metric modulation. But most music has the denominator, being 4, 4/4 time, or 3/4 time, or 8, 4/8, 6/8, or 12. But he's got 6 in the, he has music like in 2.
Can you?
You want to see it?
Yeah, I do. But I'm thinking this is also a podcast, so from here, look, that looks regular. That looks like
it looks regular, but when you start to notice, like 4/12.
Okay.
4/12. And the meters are changing all the time.
Okay. Wow.
And when you hear it, it's amazing. But I'm really wondering, how are we gonna rehearse it?
Yeah.
Because you can't turn on the metronome and just go, okay, everybody play with the click, because all of a sudden the click is off.
I've got another question. Do new music composers ever compose digitally and then hand you a digital file to listen to? Like, this is what I've got together, now interpret it?
Yes,
or does it all go to notes and then you get the sheet music?
Well, both. We would never just get a digital file and then say, oh, play what you hear. I mean, we have transcribed some things. We've picked things out, and like, for the bicentennial program, I picked a Basque tune that was so crooked. It was like, and I tried to transcribe it. I just listened to it probably 1,000 times. I could not figure out how to notate the rhythm, and so I sent it to Dino, who has perfect pitch. So
yeah. So that must mean that the Basques came to the coast of Maine.
They fished.
I didn't know that. I knew they were in Canada, but I didn't know.
Dried cod.
Yeah. Yep.
And armfuls of cod. I mean, it was like, you couldn't walk in the water without a fish passing your feet.
Wow.
So
we've got a question from Cyrus. He says, do you enjoy branching out to other genres? Example, rock or jazz?
Not well. I mean, I have done some backup stuff in rock and jazz, but one thing I love to do is play some in a Middle Eastern ensemble.
Oh, wow.
Bowdoin, which is a college here in my vicinity, they have a really cool Middle Eastern ensemble that's mostly for students, but some community members join in, and I learned a lot doing that. I haven't been able to do it in the recent past, but and I'm hoping that I can play with them more. I just love it. It's beautiful music, and it's so different.
Did you learn a different instrument to play in that ensemble?
No, viola. Okay. Viola is a great voice in Middle Eastern music. It actually fits. It's because it's so like the human voice.
Okay.
So, and then I have another thing that I would love to do more of, but it's with my friend Jim Connolly. He lives in Santa Barbara, California, where I lived for a long time. And he is such a great musician, so creative. He's a bass player, banjo player. Now he's playing, what's the Japanese flute? The shinahachi? I can't remember how it's pronounced. Shakuhachi, that's what it is, shakuhachi. And when I lived there, we had the Gove County String Quartet. Gove is medieval English for to stare stupidly, And this music was so fresh. It's short pieces. It's jazz influenced. It's Tom Waits influenced. It's circus music influenced. It's just like a little bit of everything, and mostly written out. And then it had these, what we called frothing, which was improvisatory moments, but not improvisation in the way that a jazz band improvises. It's more like whatever pops in our mind was total random free for all. And it was just really fun. And he also writes great songs, and he's got an interesting voice. So he came this way a year just before COVID, and we did a couple things together, viola and banjo.
Oh, neat.
And then he was supposed to come in the fall, and of course couldn't. So I hope we do more things together.
Yeah. So, well, that sounds very creative and maybe just a slightly different tone than what you're doing on a daily basis with DaPonte Quartet. So
it was crazy.
Crazy.
It was crazy, but it was really fun.
Yeah.
And it was really serious too. I mean, we just worked really hard, but in a different way, because we were sort of, here was the composer playing his music, and so we were sort of making it with him. I think he wrote with us in mind.
Yeah, that's so neat.
It was
so really I wanted to take a minute to share links to your to the DaPonte String Quartet website, the Facebook page, and also place where there are videos so people can hear what we're talking about. We're just talking now, but they can just popping this all in the chat area. There it goes. So if somebody came to you and said, I think I would like to know a little bit about chamber music, but I know nothing, what should they listen to first? Where should they start?
Well, it really depends on the person what I was doing. It really depends.
What if I said that? What would you advise me to?
I'd get you a Bartók string quartet.
Excellent.
Plug you in.
Right. That sounds good.
That's where I think I would go. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Boy, start at the beginning. Start with Haydn, and you start to realize, especially if you listen to the very first quartet of Haydn. Haydn wrote 80 string quartets, and he really developed the form of the string quartet. He established this idea of 2 violins, viola, and cello.
Okay.
Because it's really similar to a choir, right? Soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Is this coming in reverse? I'm not sure which.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is reverse, I think.
Sorry. Soprano. No, other way. I don't know which side is the choir on. So when you hear his first quartet, especially the slow movement of that, you're like, it's Vivaldi. It's just Vivaldi, which is beautiful. If you like Vivaldi, it's great. I love Vivaldi. I basically like almost anything that I'm playing at the time I'm playing it, because it's you just sort of you just put yourself deeper inside, and all of a sudden it's a whole universe.
Yeah.
It's like you feel like an explorer. So I think I would start probably with Haydn. He just changed so much over his lifetime, and he has an incredible sense of humor. He has a piece that you keep thinking it's over, but it's not over. He's trying to fake you out.
Funny.
And then 19th century Schubert, Death and the Maiden. What a great piece. It's like, and Schubert's last quartet that he wrote all this music and never heard it performed. I mean, he just played it with his friends in his living room. Bartók quartets. Yeah. Thomas Adès, if you like contemporary things, the incredible string quartet by Thomas Adès called Arcadiana. And that is just mind-blowing. I just think that's an incredible piece, and it looks back at music through a kaleidoscopic lens.
Oh, neat.
So if you know, the more, like, he's imitating Debussy, and he's imitating Schubert, and he's imitating Elgar, but it's all Ades, and it's just incredible music. Also very, very difficult. But oh gosh. And then I want to make sure I don't leave out Beethoven quartets. Beethoven is like the Bible of string quartets. But I'll tell you, when I was young, just like anything, you kind of go through phases of music, and you have to. It's like you're growing. You're getting used to things, and then you sort of outgrow them. It's not you anymore. When I was young, I heard a performance of a late Beethoven quartet. And everybody had been telling me, oh, this is the greatest stuff ever written. It's so profound. And I was just like, please wake me up when it's over. Like, I didn't understand. It was just too much. I couldn't, I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
And now I think it is the most divine, like music from another world. It's just incredible music.
Yeah.
And he changed so much from his early period, which is much more like Haydn, and then middle quartets, which are so tuneful and thrilling and just majestic. And then these late quartets, which he's just they're philosophical. And I mean, how does music get philosophical? I don't know. Without any words, it's pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah. So. It is interesting how in the course of your life you hear things differently. Same piece, and it like obviously our brains do change over time, and our experiences change, and our need to hear music changes also. Like our relationship with it.
Oh yeah, I used to be much more like late 19th century. Just play me something beautiful, and I'm there. Also, I was, a huge Grateful Dead fan, and I didn't know that. I sort of like, okay, it's okay now, but
yeah.
And then there are things, I always tell this story because it just really said everything to me. I had a student in Santa Barbara. He was about 8 years old, and when my students come every week, I usually say, "So, how was your week? What's new?" And they always, "Oh, nothing." So Henry came in, and I said, "How was your week, Henry? What's new?" And he said, I discovered this band." And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Oh yeah, they're incredible." I mean, he's 8 years old. He goes, "But you've probably never heard of them." I said, "What's their name?" "The Beatles."
That's charming, but they are mind-blowing. Who knows what he was listening to, at what era he was listening to, but the Beatles are mind-blowing. And it's great that the 8-year-old made that connection.
Well, and everybody discovers something for the first time, right?
Exactly.
No matter how old it is. So Beethoven, you hear it for the first time, and like if you hear the Ninth Symphony for the first time, it's like you don't know what happened. It's you're just transformed by the end.
Yeah.
Well,
at its best, that's what music does. It takes you through an experience, and you are transformed at the end.
Yeah. And I think when people get intimidated because they think they're supposed to understand it, and that's when they get turned off.
Yeah.
But I think you have to just let yourself, don't try to, if you don't get it, it's okay. Just experience it. And let it wash over you, and don't try so hard.
That's nice advice. That's like a very kind thing to tell a music listener. Don't try so hard to, that's.
Yeah, you're not supposed to walk away and go, "Oh my God, the modulation in the second movement." I mean, Who
Yeah.
cares?
Right.
It's more like just let the sound waves do something to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. At its best, it can be a magical experience. Like you're talking about the sound waves and the way we do take in that experience. And it is really something else.
Yeah.
Music.
And it's not the same thing every time. I mean,
Yeah.
you might really respond to something once and then you hear it again and like
Goes away. Yeah.
but then something else, maybe you hear it many times later and all of a sudden like, oh
Yeah.
I can't believe that's an incredible piece of music, or
Yeah.
I can't believe how moved I was, or
Yeah.
I used to think I hated opera until I actually heard it.
Yeah.
Until I heard it live, and then wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Kirsten, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day on the beautiful coast of Maine, and talking to us and sharing a little bit about what it's like to work as a professional violist in a quartet and working with other musicians. And I learned a lot on this chat, and I hope that those of you who joined us, that you've also enjoyed meeting Kirsten. Please do check out the DaPonte String Quartet and the various links that I've put in the chat. So Kirsten, you are obviously super talented, and maybe and devoted to music and hardworking and intelligent. But I wanted to ask you, what is your superpower?
It's hard to say. I don't know. Somebody else might be able to tell me better what my superpower is. I think probably I have an ability to connect dots. Like, finding resonating themes, or thinking about a person and their response to music and how they might be interested in this other type of music. Or I think that's probably
that's a great superpower. Connecting the dots. Terrific.
That's what I think.
That's great.
I can tell you all my super weaknesses, but superpower, I think that's the one.
That's lovely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Those of you who are listening to this podcast later on, thanks also. Be sure and check out DaPonte String Quartet and Kirsten Monke, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, Hannah.